Michael watched with eager anticipation as the drone in front of him started to unleash loads and loads of nanoparticles, each one brimming with a power similar to a God-forged piece. Usually, these nanoparticles would swarm towards a particular part of the drone to build its upgrade. It would cover the camera, chipping away at its glass screen and its frame before rebuilding it with something entirely new. The same way went with the other upgrades. But this time, the nanoparticles practically overwhelmed the drone, drowning it in a tsunami, like a world trapped in nothing but stormy waters. He could hear the sounds of metal clashing against metal, the main frame creaking as it underwent uncontrollable turmoil. This scared him a little bit. After all, mithril artifact was supposed to be the strongest metal in the world, but hearing it getting shredded and torn apart made him think that it was close to death. ChatJK5, how long is this upgrade going to take? It will take an estimated 2 days. That long? Upgrades used to only last for a few minutes, an hour at most. But now, it would take 48 hours before he could finally see the fruits of his hard-earned spending spree. It made sense, though, once he thought about it. The drone would practically be creating 16 new mini-drones from scratch. It was birthing something as complex and as powerful as its own body, albeit with a smaller frame. He was lucky that it would only last 2 days. I guess it's fine. I have other matters to attend to anyway. Speaking of which, he completely forgot that he was still standing in front of Serena. There was confusion, shock, and awe in her face as she watched the drone become swarmed by bee-like nanoparticles out of nowhere. She would have screamed, if it weren't for the smile on Michael's face. He was so excited with the upgrades that he forgot he was in the presence of someone else. Thankfully, Serena was someone he could trust. He wouldn't have let down his guard otherwise. Your weapon is very unique. It certainly fits you, she said, complimenting him. Thank you. Listen, she said, twiddling her fingers in her red curly hair. I know that you have a lot of things to do. But, just as she said that, the water behind her suddenly started to bubble. They both turned around, seeing a dark shadow emerge from the darkest depths of the lake towards her. Soon after, a group of 5 mermen emerged wearing armor made out of iridescent mollusk shells and corals. And unlike Serena, who had a human upper body and a mermaid's tail, these mermen were more animal than they were human. Most of them had squid-like faces, each different in size, shape, and color. Their tentacles wriggled uncomfortably as they emerged from the water, but they themselves didn't squirm. Breathing air in the surface world was only a minor inconvenience to them. It's you guys, Serena said, putting her hand on her waist, annoyed. Michael recognized them as well. He briefly saw them stand guard in the sunken ship territory down in the lake, which was controlled by none other than Princess Octavia. Princess Serena, our mistress is now ready to see you, one of the guards said respectfully. Despite their reverent attitude, Serena wasn't having it. Oh, does she now? She's so magnanimous, isn't she? Allowing me to finally enter her humble abode. In case it wasn't clear, she was full of sarcasm, which the guards certainly didn't understand. Yes, our mistress's generosity extends to everyone. Serena rolled her eyes. After all, she had been trying to talk with Octavia these past few days. But that girl always deferred to simply using her guards to communicate. It was very annoying. Why the sudden change of heart? Princess Octavia would like to talk to you and your guest, the guard said, gesturing to Michael. Serena's eyebrows slanted unevenly. You know him? Yes, Sir Keo has visited the princess quarters just recently with the esteemed Professor Lichtenstein. She would like to know the results of their mission. Keo? Serena looked at Michael, who quickly gave her an imperceptible signal with his eyes. And using his shadow, he was able to telepathically ask for her discretion regarding his true identity. He still wanted to keep on introducing himself as Keo. He found that being known as the professor's protégé opened up doors that were previously inaccessible to anyone else. I'll tell you the details later. Just go with it. Serena, the quick-thinking mermaid that she was, immediately went along with his new identity. Ah, so she wants to see Keo. All right, take us to her. Octavia's guards nodded, before moving their hands in a circle, the tentacles in their mouths wriggling as they summoned ability power from their Tao hearts. The water bubbled, forming and melding into one another. But this time the air didn't escape the water's surface tension. It built up with more and more volume like a balloon, until eventually forming a giant bubble big enough to house a single person. Then they asked Michael to step inside. This was the only way that a human could go into the merman's territory without suffocating. Of course, Michael could use his powers to survive, but that wouldn't really live up to his name as the nerdy, powerless Kyo. So, guided by the merman and Serena, they submerged deep underwater and began descending into the depths. In the meanwhile, Serena kept giving Michael furtive glances, trying to get answers about his history as Kyo. Michael knew he owed her some answers, so he conjured some telepathic magic to communicate with her under the guard's radar. You know Professor Lichtenstein? And somehow, you're his protege. You know about the professor? Serena nodded with wide eyes. Of course. I remember when he visited Atlantis. Even Father treated him as a VIP guest. Michael thought for a second. A historian meeting with the Ocean King could only mean one thing. The professor went to Atlantis? Let me guess. He was trying to do some research on Mariana's jewel, right? A gurgling sound escaped Serena's mouth as she gasped at his words. It almost caught the attention of the guards, but thankfully, a school of fishes swam past them just in time. Do not worry. They're harmless, said one of the guards. Fishes have become braver lately because of the lack of food. Michael took note of the guard's words before turning his attention back to Serena, who was still looking at him with pure shock. How do you know about that? The professor told me. Princess Octavia wanted his help in finding it. Serena's eyes narrowed. Of course she's trying to find it. Aren't you? He asked her. I heard whoever finds it will eventually rule over Atlantis and the entirety of the Seven Seas. Serena quickly shook her head. Of course not. I have no interest in that whatsoever. Taking over my father's job is not on my list of dreams. But don't you want to find it just for curiosity's sake? She considered it for a second before saying, Still no. Legends say that Mariana's jewel will bring growth and prosperity to the ocean, but conversely it could also cause ruin to the entire world. Even Michael couldn't hide his surprise. What? Is that true? Serena nodded, the grave consequence of the jewel reflected in her expression. It is true that it will bring great prosperity upon the ocean, but it does so by bringing forth a great and intense creation power that instantly increases all marine life in the world, including the ocean itself. Michael raised his eyebrows as he started to piece together the implication. If that happens, the entire world will be submerged in water. The picture of that future was grim and desolate. Mortals would be the first to die off, unable to survive in the onslaught of tsunamis and waves that reached the high heavens. If it was just a normal ocean, then perhaps a portion of humanity would still be able to live, thanks to the power of magic and mana. However, the oceans in this world weren't as kind as the oceans back in his previous life. The seven seas here were filled with catastrophic weather that would destroy even modern naval ships into pieces of scrap metal. That was the reason why travel between continents was so difficult, and why the cooperation between the Draconic Queen and the Ocean King for easier travel was so important. Michael could only see magnetics being able to live in such a future, and they only represented 0.01% of all living life on Earth, or probably even less. Suffice it to say, it would be apocalyptic, one that would even trump the catastrophic event that separated the ancient era from the modern one. Michael looked at her, trying to see if the future painted on his mind was the same as the one she was implying. She pursed her lips, as if she didn't want to believe it herself. After all, they'd been taught from their childhood until their deaths that Mariana's jewel was a relic with an ethereal power that must be treated with great reverence. They all say that bringing the wonders of the ocean to the entire world would be a gift, a glorious bestowal of the greatest power on Earth. But as someone who has always been fascinated with the surface world, especially now after she saw the virtue of humans in Reborn, she questioned whether it was really a gift or a calamity. There was beauty in the surface world that couldn't be found in the oceans, and vice versa. The two could coexist peacefully without one having to destroy the other. Then does that mean that everyone who wants to find Mariana's jewel wants to destroy the world? Serena chuckled and shook her head. Believe it or not, most of them think that they're doing everyone a favor. By killing them off? By saving them. Merman believed that finding Mariana's jewel would signal the return of a paradise once lost. And in that heaven, humans, mermen, beast folks, and all manners of living things would be able to coexist in one shared space, completely free from worries and heartbreak. If they were to be believed, then one could say that they were indeed trying to help everyone by ushering in a new era of peace and paradise. But if they were wrong, they would send a catastrophic apocalypse that destroyed the entire world. Both were two sides of the same coin, and Michael didn't like to gamble. Now that he knew what possible consequences that the Mariana's jewel could bring, he would rather let it be buried in whatever space it was hidden in, untouched for millions and millions of years. But we don't have to worry, Serena said, trying to return to her light-hearted mentality. Everyone's been trying for thousands of years, to no avail. Even my father and your professor have not come close to figuring out if it even exists or not. Michael didn't really feel comforted by that. He didn't know why. Actually, he did know why, he just didn't want to admit it to himself. After all, whether he wanted to admit it or not, he was a special being in this world. He didn't conform to normal standards. He was blessed by two gods or godlike beings, as far as he knew. First was the bratty goddess, who sent him into this world in the first place and gave him all his powers and his talents. And second was Gaia, or now known as the Iron Maiden. Blessed or cursed by them, one could see it either way. After all, thanks to their blessing, he was able to get powers that shouldn't have existed in this modern world. The bratty goddess gave him the power to control unity, something that was previously lost and could only be found in the ancient humans. Then, Gaia appeared, manifesting as his diva for one instance, which basically jump-started his whole magnetic cultivation. And would you have guessed it, both powers were found back in the ancient era. Somehow, he attracted everything that related to the mysteries of a bygone era, as if he was actually magnetic to them. From liberating an ancient original vampire, to awakening demi-humans with powers from mythical beasts, to entering bones and retrieving an all-powerful Tesseract cube, he seemed to get everything that most thought to have only been found in legends. Somehow, he had a feeling that he would also stumble upon this Mariana's jewel. Or perhaps he already had. A thought popped up in his mind, one pertaining to a certain object back in his drone's pocket dimension, before he quickly shook his head and buried the thought deep down into his subconscious. Can it be? He pondered. No. If it was the Mariana's jewel, then it should have caused a catastrophe. He nodded, as if trying to console himself. By all accounts, he should have nothing to worry about. After all, he wasn't seeing signs of an apocalyptic tidal wave coming anytime soon. But he couldn't help but think. What if it hasn't been activated yet because he hasn't brought it out to the real world? The giant, iridescent pearl that Cthulhu gave him was his leading candidate for this Mariana's jewel. The ancient Leviathan monster gave it to him as a gift for helping the poor girl Nixie from her curse. Back then, he met Cthulhu in the void of Nixie's mind. And there, he was given the pearl, which he subsequently stored immediately in his drone's pocket dimension. Technically, he hasn't brought it out to the real world just yet. I'm overthinking things, he tried to convince himself. Cthulhu seemed like a nice guy. All things considered, he wouldn't have given me a world-ending relic without warning me first, right? He was holding on to the hope that an ancient Leviathan monster had humanity's best interest in mind. It was a very precarious thought. It may very well be possible that a monster simply gave him a key that basically would unleash it and every beast in the water to feast on the remains of the sunken world. He shuddered. Thankfully, that didn't seem all that likely as well. If it was, then why keep it secret for so long? He shook his head. Thinking about such harrowing things was stressing him out. Michael? Are you okay? You're spacing out, Serena called out to him. I'm fine, he replied. I'm just thinking about how I'm very thankful for my drone right now. Eventually, Michael's rumination of a grim future was cut to an end when they finally reached the bottom of the lake. Immediately, His eyes were filled with lights and colors coming from bioluminescent corals hanging from what could only be described as street lamps littering the lake floor. There were even some small glowing fishes swimming in their own separate stream, guiding mermen and mermaids alike towards their destination like road markings. In the center of all this was a giant sunken ship made out of decaying wood, with its mast broken in half and a large hole in the middle, either made by a giant cannonball or more realistically, a leviathan shark's bite. His bubble entered familiar territory as it got led inside the sunken ship, attracting the attention of mermen and mermaids going about their day-to-day lives under the water. This time, though, there was a bit more reverence and respect in their gazes. At first he thought that his reputation as the esteemed professor's protégé finally got him some well-deserved admiration, but it turned out that their veneration was directed to the mermaid beside him. Serena curtly nodded her head at the passing merman, who reciprocated with extreme gratitude, some to the point of releasing ink, which was quite weird for him, but not so much in these parts. Nobility has its perks, I guess. Eventually, they reached a familiar throne room made from salvaged ship parts and makeshift shells. Despite that, these were no means rickety. It looked well constructed, as if it weren't recycled in the first place. "Student Kyo, I was waiting for your visit." Michael looked up, only to see a mermaid with an octopus for an upper body. Once she greeted him, her eyes turned to the red-haired mermaid beside him. Immediately, Princess Octavia's skin started to change into a myriad of colors, its dots merging and morphing to reflect the current turmoil in her emotions as she saw a familiar face. Serena. Octavia. Even though the bottom of the lake was plenty cold enough, Michael felt an even colder sensation coming from these two. One wouldn't even think they were sisters to begin with. "I sure hope whatever excuse you can come up with is enough of a reason for ignoring me," said Serena. "My apologies, sister. I simply thought that the well-being of everyone else was more important than you." "I shall take that into account in the future," Octavia replied with an imperceptible smile. Serena could only grumble after that riposte. "Anyway, let us not be rude in front of our guest," said Princess Octavia. "I take it that your business with the antique went well?" Michael or Kyo nodded. "Kinda. We retrieved the antique." "Yes. That is great news. I hope both you and the professor are working hard to decipher its contents." He scratched his chin. "I don't know yet. The professor had to leave because of some other matter. That's the reason why I hadn't returned to you so soon." Princess Octavia frowned in disappointment. "And the antique?" "A colleague of his took it to deliver to him." That was Katerina's excuse, but he knew that the professor was actually in a comatose state and was unable to study the antique. But of course, he wasn't going to say that to Octavia. "I see. That is a shame." Meanwhile, Serena couldn't help but shake her head. "How rich. Now you're involving yourself in human matters? I thought you wanted to find Mariana's jewel and rule over the entire world." Princess Octavia scowled at her. "I still do," she said. "But I know my limits. Finding the jewel is not for the short term. Right now, my priority is in the present, in New Sparta." Then, her face changed, morphing into an amiable smile just as fast as she was changing her colors to suit the environment. "And that is where you'll come in, sister." "Me?" "Yes, you and your affinity to the surface world. See, our brother has big plans in New Sparta. He is planning on uniting everyone into a single banner under his own. And I don't want that." Serena scoffed. "I'm not interested in dirtying my scales with politics, unlike you. But it does concern you, sister. To unite the mermen, he is planning on solving the problems in the lake. The pollution, the lack of resources, everything. He knows he can't do it alone, so he has gone to ask for help from the human factions. My squids have already seen a few visitors here and there, exchanging sand dollars for sous and everything else. I'm sure you've met them too." Serena didn't want to believe Octavia's glib tongue. With her personality, she would surely say anything to advance her ambitions. But she had to admit that she was right. The big transactions that she told Michael were from those human factions. "And why does this concern me?" she asked the octopus princess. "Because you've been trying to recommend your own human company to us, haven't you?" The LeBron? Reborn? Dash. Reborn, Serena corrected. Yes, Reborn. If our brother succeeds, this Reborn company of yours will have no space here in our waters. But if I succeed, I will make sure that they'd be treated with a modicum of respect. Serena took a furtive glance towards Michael, who was expressionless as the two continued to converse. What do you want me to do? It's simple, said Princess Octavia. As much as I hate to admit, your name and your face still holds a lot of sway amongst our people. Just give me your public nomination, and we can sway the opinions towards our side. Just then, Serena thought of something better. Why not just have the Reborn Company help with your campaign or whatever? They'll help with cleaning up the waters and providing food for us. Serena was confident that Michael had a solution for every single problem that the mermen faced. We don't need their help, said Princess Octavia. A human faction has already contacted me about a solution. They've assured me that they can solve the lake's problem. How? Serena asked. They will send magnetics every day to clean up the pollution, Octavia answered. This wasn't a bad solution, Percy, but it wasn't very sustainable. From her estimation, it would need about 10 magnetics or more working every day to clean up the lake to keep it fresh all the time. How about the food? We've arranged a delivery that spans from the coast of the continent to here in New Sparta. Now, it will take a long time to establish this route, but once it's secured, we'll have plenty of resources coming straight from the sea. Once again, that wasn't a bad solution. It just wasn't the perfect one. And in her opinion, Michael and the Reborn Company could simply do all that and more for a fraction of the effort. The nation made in the middle of a desolate desert proved that point. Trust me, sister. You do not need their help. Reborn can provide us with everything we want. Isn't that right? Serena asked Michael. Yes, they can, he answered. Princess Octavia frowned. How would you know? Keo answered. I know a lot about them. Princess Octavia was intrigued. The professor's protege was endorsing a human company? As far as she knew, nerds like him spent most of their time burying their heads in books and scrolls. The professor certainly did so. The fact that a man of his caliber, recluse, spoke such high regard to a company meant that it was probably worth giving a chance. Can this Reborn Company really help us? She asked them both. Serena nodded. Yes, they can. The octopus princess thought about it for a second before shaking her head. It's too late. We've already made an arrangement with another company. How much? Michael asked her. Huh? How much sand dollars were you willing to give this company? Without thinking about it much, Princess Octavia blurted out the real number. 10 million sand dollars. That's the start. We have to pay them a subsequent 1 million sand dollars each month for the maintenance of the lake. Serena took a deep breath. That was not cheap, even for a royal like Octavia, especially since she'd be shouldering most of that cost alone. But it would be worth it, though. After all, if she succeeded, she'd have the entirety of the new Sparta Lake under her ambitious tentacles. Not only that, but it was also a great start if she wanted to expand her influence even further than the lake, possibly using it as a foothold in Atlantis. Still, it was a risk, a sizable one. She was basically putting it all on the line with the hopes of overturning her brother in this underwater political race. If she lost, she didn't even want to think about that. She'd absolutely have to kiss her ambitions of ruling over Atlantis goodbye, at least not without Mariana's jewel. Other companies have put in their bids, but their price was too high for me. So, I had to get the lowest one. Then Princess Octavia turned to her sister. But maybe you can make a generous donation to my campaign, sister. With your help, we can afford one of those legacies or even that Aubert company. Add another 20 million and we can call it. After hearing those staggering numbers, Michael immediately stepped forward. Ahem. I'm pretty sure that the Reborn Company can do it much cheaper. Intrigued, the princess asked. How much? 1 million sand dollars. No more fees after that. This certainly took the octopus princess' attention. Her skin briefly shimmered into a reddish hue at the opportunity, before it quickly cooled down with a pale blue. This was too good to be true. Who wouldn't want to spend a fraction of the price for the same outcome? If she only spent $1 million for this lake renovation project, then she could use that money on other avenues and secure her campaign against her brother. It would increase her success by almost 50%. However, the only problem with that was the outcome. With such a low price, could this Reborn company truly fix the problems in their lake? Or would they simply give a false promise and leave once they got their money? That doesn't seem realistic, she said skeptically. Did I set the price too low? Michael asked himself. To be honest, he would have accepted 10,000 sand dollars and he would have been satisfied. In fact, he reckoned that the whole project could be paid with gold coins. Not to devalue that currency, but in the world of magnetics, gold coins were practically useless. It's a low price because the Reborn company values cooperation more than monetary value. They don't want to just work with you in this project alone, but others in the future as well. Think of it as a gesture of faith. Princess Octavia stayed silent, the skin of her ever-changing octopus tentacles betraying the current turmoil in her mind. Michael could see her eyes starting to calculate the risk and rewards of this choice. He wanted to help her out. Just see if it works first. The Reborn company will work on the project and you can pay the money after they're done. The octopus princess squinted her eyes at him. You sure make a lot of decisions about this company. Michael sighed and performed a slight bow. I haven't been honest, princess. The truth is that I was part of the Reborn company even before I became the professor's protege. Princess Serena and I knew each other long before this, and my aim in going to this lake was to speak with her. Silence reigned in the throne room of the sunken ship, only broken by bubbles as mermen swam around them. All right, Princess Octavia nodded. I was starting to suspect something was going on between the two of you. Does this mean you're going to work with the Reborn company? Serena asked excitedly. In the meantime, Octavia corrected, I will see first if their work is sufficient. If not, then forgive me for calling upon the other company and letting them finish the job. Michael nodded. That was understandable. Follow me. I'll let you see the problems that are plaguing our lake. Princess Octavia led Michael and Serena out of the sunken ship and out into the open waters. It seemed that that region of the water was where Octavia's camp resided, which made sense. Almost all of the mermen he saw were of the invertebrate kind, octopus, squids, and other such marine animals. Once they left the confines of the sunken ship, Michael immediately felt the solitary coldness of water. Without the bright bioluminescent corals and fishes to substitute the light of the sun, the only thing they could see was darkness and the distant luster of another territory far away. Why does it look so dead? Here, he said, his voice echoing from the dark depths. My influence only spreads as far as the sunken ship, Octavia replied. The liveliness you see there, the corals, the fishes, and everything within the ecosystem, must be maintained with a lot of resources. It already takes a lot of money to fund the sunken ship, much more if I had to expand here. Michael looked back at the fading, lonely visage of the sunken ship amidst nothing but darkness. Marine life should be able to sustain themselves without intervention, he said. In the 7 seas, yes. Life finds a way even in the most extreme circumstances there. But it seems that doesn't apply here. You don't know? We have no idea, she said dejectedly. Perhaps, because it is a man-made lake, the gods' influence doesn't spread here. Even though Michael had interacted with several goddesses, 2 to be exact, he didn't believe that they were the cause of the lake's problem. ChatJK5, can you analyze? Already done. The water does not contain the necessary phytoplanktons to start the marine food chain. Phytoplanktons were the cornerstone of marine life. Without them, the oceanic ecosystem would experience a mass extinction, much like what was happening here in the lake. Mermen eat fish, fishes eat krill, and krill eats phytoplanktons. The only reason why mermen wasn't having much trouble with food was because they could consume nutrients from the surface. But not fishes, which explained their distinct lack here in the depths. Phytoplanktons are microscopic beings, which is why mermen didn't notice their absence. They knew something was wrong, they just didn't know what. And now, Michael was going to take advantage of that and earn a whopping $1 million sand from them. ChatJK5, Please tell me you have a solution. I was able to sample from the water and analyze a phytoplankton's anatomy. I have found their constitution to be 90% similar to the ones you have in your previous world. But the other 10% are completely unique to this world. Meaning, they have been mutated with mana. In this world, continued contact with the penetrating power of mana led their DNA to change and morph into something that can store magic in their bodies. It seemed that these phytoplanktons were subject to this change, which meant that photosynthesis wouldn't be enough to sustain their growth, unlike in his previous world. The ocean in this world must have contained some kind of delicate process that allowed these phytoplanktons to receive both energy from the natural world and mana from the mystical world to survive. And this lake, despite being made through magic, lacked that aspect completely. Can you think of a way to grow these phytoplanktons with magic? Working on it, she said. Meanwhile, Michael continued to get dragged along the bubble along with the mermaid princesses. Then he noticed something. Instead of swimming towards the distant glow of lights in the far reaches of the lake, they were instead going far away from it. Princess Octavia seemed to notice his confusion and quickly explained. That place is ruled by my brother. He's richer than me, so he can afford to create a bigger territory. Nothing much of interest is going on over there. Somehow Michael doubted that. The octopus princess was letting her dislike of her brother influence her actions. He had a feeling that she just didn't want to go over there, probably because of jealousy and other such emotions. Instead, I'll show you the dirty side of the lake. Eventually, the octopus princess led him towards a very deep trench that led even deeper down the crust of the world. Michael couldn't see anything beyond this chasm, even with his supreme talent. No life lived here. Standing just mere inches away from the near vertical cliff, even Michael felt a little bit uncomfortable. He willed his bubble to pull backwards, worried that the darkness would somehow pull him closer towards the depths. The severe lack of mana in that place was unnerving, especially to someone whose life revolved around magic. It felt like the complete antithesis of him. While he was full of magic, this place was devoid of it. No wonder he felt like the darkness was trying to swallow him. It was attracted to his mana. The only way to correct the imbalance of magic or complete lack of it was to imbue it with something that was full of magic. And that was none other than Michael. See the dirty depths of this lake? Princess Octavia said, trying not to turn away. This place was revolting, even for mermen, who spent their whole lives in the dark depths of the ocean floor. As it turned out, the pollution that they were talking about wasn't actual trash that people threw in the water. It was a pollution of a severe lack of mana. This dirty water is spreading all around and infecting our people. Many have already reported getting sick to their stomachs, unable to even stand or talk. Unfortunately, some have already succumbed to its dire effects. This trench is taking all of the mana in the water. Those mermen are probably experiencing mana sickness, something that only happens when their bodies cannot take in mana like they were supposed to. It finally made sense why phytoplanktons couldn't survive in this lake. All the mana that they were supposed to eat were being swallowed by this trench instead. But even that didn't seem to satiate this ancient, tectonic edge. Whoever constructed New Sparta didn't do a good job. They should have chosen a better place to put the lake. Somehow, they chose the worst spot possible. They chose a spot where it had a trench leading to the center of the earth. Of course, that was an exaggeration, but it seemed like the truth with the extreme lack of life down there. So, in order to solve both the pollution and lack of resources in this lake, I have to solve the lack of mana in this trench. Seems easy enough, he lied to himself. Thankfully, his personal AI assistant came in handy once again. I have formulated a decent solution to this problem. Oh, tell me, this trench needs mana. If we were to give it the sustenance it needs, then we can solve both problems at once. He shook his head. But to do that, we'd need to basically spend a year moving mana from the surface world to the depths of this lake. That's not very efficient. It would have been better if Princess Octavia went with the other company at that point. At least with them, they'd promised to send 10 magnetics every day to clean up the dirty water, which probably meant imbuing it with mana. We don't have to fill it up completely, said ChatJK5. We just have to fill it up to the point where it won't bother the rest of the water anymore. And before Michael could even say anything else, he suddenly reeled his head back as a flurry of information washed over his mind. ChatJK5 began sending him loads of materials regarding the blueprints of this new project that they were going to complete. Kyo? What's wrong? Michael snapped back, returning to reality. It's nothing. I just found a solution. He couldn't help but break out in a smile. The solution that ChatJK5 gave him not only solved the current problems of the lake, but also gave way for an opportunity to spread the ideals of the nation of Reborn. That's funny, Princess Octavia chuckled. But let's go back to our topic. If the Reborn company can truly help us with our problem, then they will have my cooperation. It's even more important if they do it before my brother can accomplish it with his cohorts. Octavia's rush could be explained by the fact that their time with this problem was quickly coming to a close. Her brother had already made some allies with the humans, and they would surely start to renovate the lake in the coming days. Meanwhile, Princess Octavia and her camp were still deciding on who they were going to ally with. She was afraid that by the time she chose someone, it would have already been proven moot. By that point, the consensus within the lake would flow towards her brother, basically confirming his leadership within New Sparta. I'll go back to the Reborn company and they can start to work on it, Michael promised. I'm only trusting you because of your reputation and my sister's endorsement, but I can't give them too much time, she warned him. Michael nodded, understanding her predicament. With a wave, he bid Princess Octavia goodbye before his bubble started to ascend back to the surface of the water. Even before he broke out of the water, he immediately engulfed himself in a dome of shadow, allowing him to teleport directly back to the nation of Reborn. He found himself in the middle of the dwarven forge, with the heat from multiple furnaces strong enough to disturb the invisible prismatic shield around his body. "Boss, do you need something again?" one of the dwarves asked him. "Yup," he answered. "No, you can go ahead and keep on working." Most of the dwarves were still busy creating works of art intended for Rebornian use. He could see them working on mithril artifacts meant for new citizens. The nation kept on expanding, to the point where Michael was quite backed up on the people that he had to awaken. Even on his off days, he had to dedicate most of his time awakening more Rebornians to officially welcome them into the nation. But it seemed that the rate of acceptance was much higher than even what he could realistically handle. The list keeps on growing and growing with no signs of stopping. It was worth it though, as the talent pool in Reborn was getting more and more skilled as people began to join. Most of them were talentless, but were able to find their calling after Michael awakened their true powers. I wish there was a way I could awaken people without having to touch them. Would you like to create a new app on the phone? Michael stopped in his tracks, completely forgetting about why he was here in the Dwarven Forge in the first place. Say what now? Theoretically, your supreme talent can awaken someone even from a distance. The only problem is the fact that there's nothing that connects you and them. But with the phone, that becomes possible. Michael started to consider it, and he couldn't help but smack his own head for not thinking about it before. A phone connected to the Internet Cube through mana, through Unity. And his supreme talent allowed him to control mana to a maximum extent. There was nothing he couldn't do with mana. So theoretically, he could program an app that allowed him to basically perform a magic spell from a distance and transfer it from the phone to its user. Once that connection was secured, he could reach deep into their psyche and awaken the latent talent within their blood. You're right. That's amazing, ChatJK5. What's going on with you today? You're on a roll. He couldn't help but notice his AI assistant's initiative recently. It's as if she was taking a much more direct position within Reborn. He wasn't mad at that. She was his partner, after all. She wasn't just a secretary. Thank you for the compliment. Glances at Harbinger and smirks. Kisses. You do know that I'm him and he is me, right? So technically you are a him. Michael, would you like me to create the app? As much as Michael was intrigued with this idea, he simply couldn't let himself get sidetracked. Let's table that for later. We don't even have a reliable way to manufacture phones en masse. For now, we gotta focus on the mermen. With an incredible, almost Spartan self-control, Michael shook off his urge to perform a side mission and focus on his main one instead. His focus quickly returned once he reminded himself that 1 million sand dollars was on the line. Where was I? The underwater machine, yes. He quickly ignored the weird looks he got from the dwarves as he got caught up in his own reverie, and went to gather all the material he would need for the contraption. Once he obtained the raw materials, he went back to his room and started to work on its assembly. About 10 minutes later, the machine was finally finished. It was a tall, black rectangular box the size of a human, with a tube going from the top and out to the bottom. Even if one didn't have an aquarium in their homes, they would still recognize this contraption with one single look. It was an aquarium filter. How was this going to solve the lack of mana in the lake? Well, it was quite a simple solution, really. Water would be flowing from the top of the tube and get sucked inside. There, the water would undergo a process that would imbue them with mana, enough to satiate them into normal levels that would bring the population of phytoplanktons back to normal, and therefore restore the balance of the marine ecosystem. This could be achieved using an object that was brimming with mana. And that was none other than a unity bomb or a unity power source, the same one giving energy to a phone. The unity power source was technically a bomb. But Michael found a way to make them small enough to be a stable source of energy. But what if he didn't? What if he made something so big and so unstable that it would explode even with the slightest of bumps? Then all 8 mana inside that unity PS would explode outwards, destroying anything it touched. But even with magic, this world still followed the basic principles of thermodynamics. Matter can't be made or destroyed. That explosion wouldn't magically destroy mana. No, it would disintegrate it into its most basic particles that would slowly reintegrate back into nature. Now, what if after that explosion he sent a mana-hungry stream of water through it? The result would be simple. All those mana would get absorbed by the water, making it dense and rife with energy that the phytoplanktons would love to eat. That was the basic principle for this water filter. Mana-devoid water goes in, saturated water goes out. Make the filter big enough, then this contraption could easily level out the problems in the lake. Now you may ask, what happens with the excess energy from the explosion? Well, ChatJK5 thought of something amazing. She put a turbine inside the filter. During the explosion in the filter, water would get blasted through the turbine, which was connected to a generator, allowing it to transform all that mechanical energy into electricity. It was an incredibly elegant solution, one that was credited only to ChatJK5. She not only solved the problem, but also created something more. Once he created this proof of concept, he quickly teleported back to New Sparta, finding himself atop the lake once again. Meanwhile, as Michael was out creating the prototype filter, Princess Serena and Princess Octavia were left alone under the water, their attitude towards each other turning the water even colder. "Why are you in such a hurry?" Serena asked, breaking the silence between them. Octavia didn't answer for a second. Her mind seemed to be focused on other matters as she stared off in the distance, towards the opaque luster of an underwater city different from the opposite side of the sunken ship. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Serena said, swimming towards her line of sight. This confrontation warranted a scoff from the octopus princess. "Yes, I can see you, my beautiful sister," Octavia said sarcastically. "You've always been the center of attention, just like him." Serena frowned. "Why are you so against our brother becoming the leader of the lake? He's competent enough, you know. He certainly wouldn't bring us into ruin." "You just don't get it," Princess Octavia muttered under her breath. Then, she started swimming back to the sunken ship, taking the conversation to a halt. The red-haired mermaid swam after her sister. "What don't I get?" But the octopus princess kept on swimming back towards the lake, only for her to stop just as her territory was in her line of sight. Octavia's skin started to undergo a turmoil of colors, ranging from passionate red, to a yellowish hope, to a dejected blue. She saw a group of mermen, a family of squid humans to be exact. Deep in the darkness, this family was out in the water holding seaweed nets on one hand, and a swordfish harpoon in the other. They were hunting, searching for food to put in their corals the next day. Their makeshift bag was barely filled with glowing mackerel. Their night was just ahead of them. "Mom, can this be eaten?" A young squid mermaid held up a dead, decaying fish in her hands. Its scales were already rotting, its eyes gray and almost popping out of its sockets. Clearly, this was not edible in any way, shape, or form. "That's only for adults, hun. Give that to me and you can have this instead," her mother said, quickly taking away the rotting fish from her daughter's hands. Its putrid smell almost made her puke, but she was able to hold it back until after her daughter proudly flourished her new fish at her brother. For a moment, Octavia's guard loosened as she stared at this grim scenario in front of her. "What are you looking at?" Serena asked, her gaze wandering around the empty waters. Octavia's expression immediately steeled, shaking her head from her thoughts. "It's nothing. Just a memory," she muttered under her breath. Urged by this vision, Octavia quickly turned toward Serena. "I can only give the Reborn company one more week before I accept the other company's offer." "What? That's way too soon. How are they going to fix the lake if you don't give them enough time?" Octavia's eyes reeled back to that vision. No, that memory, before shaking her head. Protecting her territory and her peace was more important. "I'm sorry, but I have to secure my campaign." Serena almost wanted to burst out. "Campaign this, campaign that. Why don't you consider the well-being of your fellow mermen first?" "I am," Octavia shouted, her voice echoing through the calm waters. These two princesses had completely different opinions. Serena knew that the quality of life for all mermen would increase drastically if Reborn were to be the one to help them in this place. But of course, Octavia knew nothing about them and was reasonably suspicious of their so-called promises. Octavia wasn't just responsible for herself, but the entirety of the invertebrate mermen in the lake. "You have to give them at least a month. A week and a half is all I can give them." "Oh, come on. It's like you don't even want to give them a chance." It was in that moment that they suddenly heard the sounds of bubbling water from the surface above. They both looked up and saw a familiar face waving at them. It was Michael. Michael descended into the bottoms with the bubble, seeing the tense situation between the two. "Whoa, what happened here?" Serena, with her hands crossed on her chest, said. "Ask her. She's backing out of our arrangement." "I'm not backing out. I'm only giving a time frame for Reborn." "Yeah, a week. That's barely nothing, right, Michigan?" Just as Serena was about to reveal his real name, Michael quickly interrupted their conversation. "A week is totally fine. See, I am indignant at this." "You said what now?" Even Octavia was stunned at his acceptance. "You're fine with this?" Michael nodded. "Yeah, that's plenty of time. Realistically, the Reborn company will need about 3 to 4 days of setting up before we're done. It will take another 1 or 2 days before the results can be seen, so a week is actually acceptable." Princess Octavia stared at Michael with complete and utter shock. She didn't know if she should be amazed or suspicious. Meanwhile, Serena, on the other hand, couldn't help but erupt in a fit of laughter. "Ha ha ha. I see. Yes, of course." Octavia ignored the obvious maniacal laughter coming from her sister and moved closer to Michael. "I do not appreciate pranks. More so liars." Michael shrugged. "It's true. I have the solution right here," he said just as a giant shadow flowed out from his feet and out into the open waters. A tenebrous shadow formed in the open waters, and a second later, a vertical black box appeared in its place. Princess Octavia was clueless as to what she was looking at, but Princess Serena was a little bit more familiar with the contraption. Its mechanical nature reminded her of the giant buzzing buildings in the outskirts of the nation of Reborn, which produced all the electricity in the parched lands. "This is your solution?" Octavia said, skepticism leaking in her voice. "It is, but it's going to need a little bit of a setup." Without waiting for her response, Michael raised his hand and summoned 4 magic circles in the water, surprising the octopus princess. Simultaneous casting? She would have never thought that the nerdy history protege would turn out to be so talented in the mystic arts. Michael ignored her surprise and summoned an enclosure similar to that of a giant aquarium. It was lined with metal on its sides, and a very sturdy glass that allowed anyone to look inside. This aquarium was something that would only be seen in a zoo, since it was large enough to enclose large marine animals like dolphins, sharks, and the like. Octavia and Serena looked on as Michael manifested this enclosure using only magic, barely even lifting his finger as he did so. The ease in which he completed this task betrayed his true talent as a master of the mystic arts. One could see in Octavia's eyes that she was starting to look at Michael in a different way. Now, he wasn't just a history student, but a capable magician. Once the giant aquarium was finished, Michael installed the 6-feet-tall filter on the side of the glass pane. Then, he reached down into his pockets and revealed a simple spherical object the size of a nail. Its prismatic luster emanated a kind of power that was innately destructive and overpowering in nature, something that Octavia had never seen before. "A bomb," she muttered under her breath. The octopus princess rightly deduced the Unity Bomb's true nature. Her eyebrows raised, now becoming more interested in that object than the solution Michael had prepared. Michael opened a latch on the top of the filter and installed the Unity Bomb in an indentation in the stainless steel interior that perfectly fit its size. Once securely in place, he closed the latch, making sure it had no gaps. If there were, the internal explosion within could leak out and destroy the whole aquarium entirely. Then, pressed the on button on the top and waited until the machine buzzed to life. Princess Octavia reeled back, her tentacles moving defensively as it stared at the weird object making such grating noises. "What is that?" Michael knocked on the filter's frame. "Don't worry, I've ensured its safety," he said nonchalantly as the Unity Bomb inside started to emit explosions that rippled out into the water. He closed the aquarium by manifesting a glass lid on top, only letting the intake pipe jut out near the edge. Water began rushing inside the filter from the metal intake tube on top, and began shooting them inside the aquarium at an even faster speed. Michael looked at his own creation and nodded, satisfied with his work. After the initial shock was over, Princess Octavia slowly swam up to the giant aquarium and studied it carefully, particularly the strange black box that seemed to contain a metal monster inside. Is this it?" Princess Octavia said, a little bit disappointed. With such a large contraption, she was hoping to see a much more fantastical change in the waters. However, despite this failure, it did successfully change her mind. Seeing his mystical talents as well as that strange prismatic bomb, Princess Octavia now wanted to ally herself with Kyo even more than before. He might not solve their lake's problem, but he could offer a different kind of help in her campaign against her brother. Instead of this, how about we talk about a different kind of cooperation? Michael raised his hand, an excited smile growing on his face. "Wait!" His gaze was pointed towards a quaint group of small fishes swimming aimlessly in the gloomy dark waters of the lake. Their scales were gray and lifeless, with just a hint of color glistening in the tiniest bit of light coming from the surface. Octavia knew this species of minnows. They grew to large numbers back in the Great Sea, so they imported a lot of them here in the lake in the hopes of that they would reproduce and become a source of nutrition for all life and mermen alike. However, the lack of sustenance in the water quickly dwindled down their numbers. And since they were easy prey, they became the first few fishes to become hunted during this great shortage of food. Forced into hiding, these friendly, beautiful fishes now became morose. They avoided all contact from fishes and mermen alike, and would swim away at the smallest hint of someone else swimming in the waters. Octavia's eyes widened once she realized that these minnows weren't swimming away. They were instead slowly creeping up towards them. This was a complete shock to her. The strange mechanical churning of the filters should have scared these fishes off before they could even get close enough to see it with their own eyes. Yet it continued to swim towards the giant glass containment, their movements careful but curious. Michael quickly twisted his hands, conjuring a magic circle that allowed him to create a small opening in the aquarium's glass pane. All three of them were silent as the first minnow slowly entered through the gap. Octavia especially held her breath, afraid that the water coming out of her gills would scare these fishes away. Her worries were proven moot as the second minnow entered the aquarium. Then the third, then the fourth, until all of them swam inside the containment with no signs of fear at all. These apprehensive minnows were gliding through the waters with vitality, darting around like a kid on a playground. It was as if they didn't care if they depleted all of their energy while they swam. How is this possible? These fishes, they're getting fed, Octavia realized. Slowly but surely, the gray scales on these minnows were starting to regain their luster as they moved around in these normal streams of water. Michael knew what was happening. Inside this aquarium, phytoplanktons were multiplying at a commensurate rate. They were attracted by the mana-rich waters circulating inside, which in turn attracted the minnows that now began to feast on these phytoplanktons, thus starting the abundant cycle of marine life. "It works," he declared. "It works," Serena echoed back, nodding in pride and satisfaction. She looked back at her sister, pleasantly taking in the shock and awe at her expense. "It works," Octavia muttered, still in disbelief. They waited for a few more minutes, before more and more fishes began to waddle inside the aquarium. It wasn't just minnows now, it was also starfishes, sea urchins, crabs, you name it. The gathering crowd of motley marine animals further exacerbated the cycle of life inside, attracting more and more until a few hours later, the aquarium was filled to the brim with fishes. Even seeing it form in her own eyes, Octavia still couldn't believe what was happening. How? You may not know this, but the waters in this lake are completely devoid of mana. Mermen and beast folks in general only had Tao hearts at their disposal. They did not have mana cores, meaning they couldn't sense the mana in the waters. And without mana, microscopical life like phytoplanktons cannot reproduce. And without them, these fishes cannot sustain themselves. But thanks to this filter I made, the water gets saturated with mana. That's the water you see flowing out of that black box. He pointed towards the metal pipe on the bottom of the filter. That's where most of the fishes gathered around, despite getting thrown asunder by the fast stream. Princess Octavia, despite not knowing the terms Michael threw out, was quickly able to follow the logic behind his reasoning. "I see. In short, this filter of yours brings sustenance to the water, and in turn brings food to the fishes." "Yep, exactly. Can you build more?" He nodded. "This is just a prototype for now, but I can build an even bigger one later. That can probably saturate the waters around the sunken ship easily." "And what if you build more?" "It's possible to saturate the entire lake if need be. It would be a huge undertaking since they'd be placing almost 100 of giant filters around the lake, especially around the trench. But it was possible." "Kyo." "Yes. Take my sand dollars." Michael inwardly celebrated. He cleansed his expression of avarice before turning towards Octavia. "Does that mean you'll work together with the Reborn company?" 1,000,000 sand dollars. "Yes. I can promise you 100 million sand dollars upon completion of the project." Michael's eyes widened upon that promise. 100 million sand dollars was inconceivable to him and treated it as if it was a distant, tantalizing dream that he would need years upon years to achieve. But now, a mermaid princess was pledging that amount upon the completion of one project. It was insane. "Is it too small?" Octavia asked, an anxious frown growing on her tentacled face. Her colored spots were changing colors, physically showing the mental calculations that she had to do to find a way to increase that money even further. "It's enough, Michael said. "But are you serious? You're going to give me that much?" "Of course," she said matter-of-factly. If she had offered less money, she herself would be indignant for Michael's sake. Solving the problem in the lake with such an ingenious and miraculous way necessitated such a high price. Never would she have imagined that such a strange piece of metallurgy would produce something with such a magical, almost magnetic effect within marine life. In her and every other merman's mind, metals and the sea didn't mesh together very well. One rusted under the onslaught of the other, and the other became polluted because of such effects. More than that, this filter of his was a product of the surface world. How come something that was made by human hands solved a problem that even mermen themselves didn't even have an inkling of an idea on how to answer? Granted, they have asked the humans for help regarding the lake, But even those legacies couldn't have made something so consummate. It brought life back to the waters immediately and with everlasting effects. The company that she had previously chosen to partner with only promised a temporary solution. They would have visited the lake every day to bring artificial growth inside the waters to promote underwater life to procreate. When they tested it out, although life boomed for a short while, it also came with some unwanted side effects. It ranged from something inconsequential like seaweed becoming stiff, to mildly concerning with the mutation of fishes to become more savage and monster-like. The worst side effect was when young mermen began to grow grotesque, horrid, and misshapen tentacles all over their bodies. This only happened very rarely, only once or twice in a span of a month, so most mermen accepted it as a good trade-off for not starving in these cold lake waters. But this filter solution had none of those complications. Instead of horrifying marine animals by feeding it with artificial magic food and forcing them to mate, it naturally attracted them and made a suitable breeding ground instead. It was also self-sustaining, obvious by the fact that it had been running for a few hours now with no signs of stopping. Michael estimated that the Unity bomb inside the filter would run out every week, but that was nothing compared to the maintenance that the other companies offered. And most of all, it solved the very root of the problem instead of just fixing its symptoms. It didn't just fix the famine in the lake, it fixed the very quality of life inside it. Princess Octavia felt fresh water cycle through her lungs. She closed her eyes, feeling as if she was back in the comforting tentacles of the seven seas. When would you be able to install the filters in the sunken ship? Still reeling from shock, Michael shook his head to regain focus. I can do it right now. Splendid. Let us go back now so you can receive your compensation. Michael, in his little bubble, sauntered over back to the sunken ship in a daze. Time seemed to whiz past him, and before he knew it, he was looking at a sunken, half-decayed, full of barnacles treasure chest right in front of his eyes. This was the kind of alluring prize that the infamous Flying Dutchman would offer you in exchange for your soul. But no, it was just the price for one giant filter totaling $1 million sand dollars. And if Michael continued to create more and more filters throughout the new Sparta Lake, he would end up with $100 million sand dollars by the end of it. Maybe even more, since he'd need more than 100 filters to completely saturate the waters with healthy mana. It was insane. Somehow, in a span of a few days, he just kept on finding ways to earn enormous amounts of sand dollars, and the opportunity to earn even more. Immediately, his mind began to think about how to produce these filters as soon as possible. Now, the process to create them was easy and could be done by the Rebornian dwarves in a heartbeat. The problem now was the materials. Just like with the Rebornian phones, these filters needed both Unity power sources and mithril in order to function properly. Only something as durable as mithril could contain the enormous explosion inside the filter. Unfortunately, only a select few dwarves could create mithril all on their own. Fortunately, this would be solved once he found Byru, the Dwarven King, somewhere in the bustling life in New Sparta. Once he got his cooperation, they could finally start on the mass production of mithril, for both the phones and the filters. Then, the next problem would be the Unity power source itself. These filters needed to be replenished with new fuel every week, which meant he had to produce them constantly alongside the phones. Now, because of such a high need for power, these filters needed a total of 10 Unity power sources to function, which was equivalent to 10 Reborn phones. And unlike the mithril, he had no help when creating Unity PS. He only had his clones to help him, which were already working day and night to produce it. The demand for Unity PS keeps rising. My clones can keep up for now, but eventually it's not going to be sustainable. He hadn't even finished delivering on the phones that the Duchess and the dwarves bought. And now he was burdened with another order. He'd have to push back his original schedule to deliver with the giant filter Princess Octavia ordered. It was worth it though, since 10 phones only equaled 1,000,000, while a single filter cost $1 million. Not only that, but these mermen were in a more desperate state. The more these filters were delayed, the higher the chances of people dying from the water's pollution. Behold, dear inhabitants of the sunken ship, Princess Octavia's shouts reverberated through the breached layers of the wooden vessel, taking every invertebrate merman's attention. They all looked towards the captain's quarters, where Octavia's throne room resided. I have brought with me a savior. He has with him an object of salvation and a device of miracle. A filter. Gasps and gurgles echoed through the waters. I have seen it do the impossible, bring back the luster of scales within our fishes. It has brought back life even within the dead and decrepit lake floor. Trust that I, your great and benevolent leader, have finally solved the problems of the lake. Immediately, cheers, shouts, and tentacle slapping resounded throughout the sunken ship. They didn't even know what the supposed filter was supposed to do, but the impassioned plea from their invertebrate princess already got them worked up. All hail the princess. She deserves to become the leader of our lake. She's the only one who can do it. Yeah. Thank you, princess. You've saved our lives. Michael watched on with raised eyebrows as the residents of the sunken ship began to praise Octavia relentlessly. He wasn't one for ostentatious applause, but he expected a little bit of appreciation from the mermen since he was the one who brought the filter in the first place. But he couldn't blame them. After all, Princess Octavia beckoned all of them to cheer for her, as if she was the one who solved the lake's problem in its entirety. Wow, she's good. He couldn't help but shake his head in appreciation for Octavia's oratory skills. She was just like the politicians back in his previous world, taking credit for things that they basically just signed a check on. Ha! Serena sighed, already tired of this charade. Don't mind her. She's just doing whatever she can to win the campaign against our brother. What is that campaign anyway? Princess Octavia was certainly walking and talking just like a modern politician back on Earth. But Michael didn't know if their idea of a campaign was the same one that he had on his mind. Did it involve voting? Campaigning? Bribing? Dirty tactics? Octavia and our brother Triton is in a close battle for public opinion on who's going to eventually lead the mermen in New Sparta. Right now, we are a separated group. Octavia and her invertebrate brothers and sisters are on one side. Me, Reed, Nixie, and the other human-like mermen are on the other. And the last, and perhaps the strongest within the merman species, the mammalian marines are led by our brother Triton. But even with their superior strength and numbers, Triton knows that he will stand no chance against the other beast folks and the human factions. And if we lose in the all-tournament a year from now, we'll be a laughingstock back in Atlantis. It will be an embarrassing fiasco that none of us, not even the Ocean King, can live down. The Ocean King was one of the two people who organized this whole migration towards the surface world in the first place. It would be a disgrace if the mermen ended up as the weakest race within beast folks at the end of the campaign. Of course, not everyone agrees on who should take charge. The invertebrates will choose Octavia, while the mammals will choose Triton. How about you? Michael asked Serena. She shook her head. I'm not interested in politics. All I want to do is enjoy my time here in the surface world. The other human-like mermen agree with me, so we're opting out of this race. As much as she denied wanting any participation in this underwater election, Michael had a feeling that Serena used her influence to basically force the other human mermen to remain a neutral force. She was a princess, after all. Is there some kind of voting system? As a matter of fact, yes. It's the people you see here. He was confused. Those that believe Octavia should rule over the lake will cast their vote by living in her territory, she explained. That's why the people you see here all support her. If they didn't, they would move to the bigger city where Triton resides. Michael finally understood why Triton and Octavia were going head-to-head in a race to solve the lake's problem. By making their territory a much better place to reside, they would be attracting the votes towards their side. That was why, after discovering the wonders of the filters, Octavia didn't hesitate and pulled out all the stops to make it hers. It won't be long before our sunken ship becomes a paradise for marine life. I will make it happen, Octavia promised. By framing it as if she discovered the filter like a sunken treasure, she was basically redirecting all of their positive emotions towards her own name, further solidifying the idea that she should be the one to lead the mermen in New Sparta. Michael didn't mind all that much. After all, she was paying 100 million sand dollars for that privilege. Tell your friends. Tell your family. Come back to the sunken ship and live in paradise. Live in paradise, the emotional merman echoed back. After that bold, self-serving speech, Octavia turned back towards Michael, her ever-changing skin still flushed red. How soon can you build the filter? Don't you hear their pleas? It's exhilarating. Yeah, I bet. Michael muttered under his breath. I can make it today. She squinted, sensing the hidden words in his silence. But, you see, cleansing the water isn't the only thing that this filter can do, he professed. It can do so much more, like generating energy and electricity. She tilted her head, tentacles in her mouth forming question marks. Really? We can have electricity underwater? Serena's outburst almost burst Octavia's ears, making her recoil backwards. She didn't expect such an animated reaction from her sister. What is it? Oh, you're gonna lose your mind, Serena said, grabbing at Octavia's lithe, sucker-filled arms. Still filled with confusion and finding her sister useless, she turned to Michael for an explanation. Michael then looked around the sunken ship, his gaze eventually landing on the window of the captain's quarters. Outside, he saw a line of rope using intertwined seaweed hanging from the broken mast of the ship all the way to its rudder. Tied along the seaweed rope were mermen and mermaid clothes flapping chaotically as it went against a huge torrent of natural water streams, barely holding on thanks to the seashell clipping them to the rope. This looked like the underwater equivalent of a clothesline. What is that for? He asked Octavia. That's where we wash our clothes. The fast wave of water helps in cleaning all the dirt and muck out of our attire, she explained. Why so many? Why do you all wear such thick seaweed clothing and armor? With a confused expression, Octavia answered, It's because the water here is cold. Don't you have something to warm the water? We have thermal algae back in Atlantis, but they're hard to cultivate here in the lake due to the lack of resources, so we just have to brave the ice-cold depths through thick clothes. Why are you asking so many questions? Michael nodded, now finally ready to answer her original question. However, it seemed that Serena got to him first. Electricity can wash those clothes for you in just a few minutes. It goes broom, then it spins and then... Octavia palmed Serena's face and focused on Michael. Electricity can power appliances and machines that can do certain tasks automatically without any intervention. It can wash your clothes, it can heat water, it can light up a room, you name it. Everything is possible thanks to electricity. As expected, Princess Octavia couldn't find it in her imagination to see the things that Michael was describing. In her mind, all she saw were loyal and lithe tentacles doing her laundry for her and manually rubbing its suckers to produce heat. Here, I'll just show it to you. Michael summoned his tenebrous shadow, allowing another dome to appear underwater. Once it dissipated, it revealed another simple rectangular metal box, small enough to be carried with both hands. It had a ridged, flexible tube out on one end, similar to that of a vacuum. On the other end was a similar wire plug extending 2 feet and 2 prongs at the end. This is called a plug. Once I connect this to the filter, it will take excess energy in the form of electricity from the explosion and redirect it to this little machine called a water heater. Since the filter wasn't installed yet, Michael simply held onto the prong and produced magical electricity with his hands, making sure it wouldn't accidentally electrocute everyone in the water. Once the water heater had power, it suddenly buzzed into life, making a similar but less pronounced noise than the filter. It began sucking in water from the inlet and began transferring heat through the coils inside. Those coils were heated to the point of incandescence, and as the cool water rushed through them, it began increasing the water's temperature through the process of heat transfer. The liquid that came out of the flexible tube was something that was just a few degrees away from boiling. If not for the icy cold waters in the lake to counteract this, it would immediately scald anyone that came in contact with it, even with merman scales. Thankfully, it turned into nothing but a warm hug in the depths of this lake. Princess Octavia held out her hands, her lithe tentacles feeling the familiar heat of the waters. The ever-changing chromatophores softened, finally feeling comfort for the first time. However, the water quickly cooled down under the onslaught of the cold, artificial waters of the lake. As you can see, we can heat up the waters using this machine, he said, handing over the water heater to her. She observed the metal contraption, her dainty limbs observing every nook and cranny. It doesn't use algae, she realized. It doesn't. When will it run out? He shook his head. Well, if the filter keeps on working properly as intended, never. I think one giant filter is enough to generate power for this entire sunken ship without problem. Given that the fuel is restocked every week. The filter can power such a thing? Yep. And that's not all. We have plenty of different appliances back in the nation of Reborn that you guys can use down here. We'll have to make them waterproof, but that will be easy to solve. We can install light bulbs around the sunken ship, Serena added. The bioluminescent corals and fishes were only limited to inside the sunken ship. It required a lot of resources to keep them functioning, so they couldn't install it outside. But light bulbs didn't need food to function, they just needed electricity. Electricity that will be generously provided by the filters. So, not only would the filters provide more food to marine animals underwater, thereby allowing for those bioluminescent corals and fishes to grow out of the confines of the sunken ship, it could also provide constant illumination that those animals couldn't do. It was a very elegant solution. Serena then began throwing out all the appliances she liked back in the nation of Reborn, completely overwhelming the octopus princess with those unfamiliar terms. Anyway, the Reborn company can provide all of those appliances for us, right? She asked Michael. He nodded. He then glanced at the octopus princess expression. And somehow, for the first time, her true feelings were hidden even with the ever-changing colors of her skin. It remained a constant reddish, almost auburn color. Speechless in amazement, Serena asked pridefully, "You better thank me and the Reborn company for such gifts." Octavia, as if answering her sister's dare, turned towards Michael and swam up to him. And before he could even react, she caught him in her embrace and suddenly puckered up her mouth, giving him a kiss on the cheeks. Both Serena and Michael were stunned. Serena was shocked to see her sister do something so bold, so promiscuous, so filled with debauchery. Her scream reverberated through the sunken ship, making some invertebrate mermen produce ink out of shock. Only once after Serena's shouts died down did Octavia finally let go of her embrace, leaving behind a supple reddish mark in his cheeks. Her embrace even left some circular marks around his arms because of her tight hug. "You are one impressive human. Why don't you stay by my side and we can rule over Atlantis together?" Ha ha ha. Meanwhile, Michael couldn't even react properly to her proposition, as he was still stunned from the initial ambush. Somehow, his absolute unity defense didn't activate. It allowed her to come into close contact with him. What the? ChatJK5? Without a body, he could feel his personal AI assistant shrug. "Don't blame me. I wasn't the one in charge of that." Then how? She had no answer for that. Michael could only blame it on the fact that she didn't mean no harm in her kiss. His defenses didn't perceive it as an attack, and therefore allowed it to happen. "Octavia," Serena lectured with reproach. "What? I'm just overwhelmed with emotions for the human. How come you've hidden such a gem to me for so long? Planning on selfishly having him for yourself?" "Huh. I've been trying to tell you about the Reborn company for weeks." Princess Octavia waved her off. "In any case, I didn't expect this filter of yours to be such a boon to our territory. Very well, I'm sold. How shall we purchase these appliances of yours?" "Ahem," Michael said, her mark still left in his cheeks. Ignoring the reddish heat in his cheeks, he focused back on business. This was another chance for him to earn the big bucks. Michael was about to answer her, when Serena barged in and confronted her sister for such actions. "That's so inappropriate," she shouted. "Oh, come on, it's not that bad. Did you want me to sever one of his limbs and give it to me for an extended period of time?" Octavia said jokingly. "That's even worse." Michael didn't even want to know what that meant. ChatJK5 wanted to explain to him, but he quickly muted her. "Then how should I have shown my appreciation for him?" asked Octavia, her lithe limbs and tentacled face shrugging. "Then you should have." Michael wanted to interrupt their conversation then and there. He didn't want Serena to further exacerbate the situation even further. After all, it was because of her words that prompted the octopus princess to do such a bold gesture of appreciation. But then Serena's next words made him reconsider. You should instead offer to live just like a guest of the nation of Reborn. There, they have to pay a monthly fee in order to access electricity. Michael's eyebrows raised. Then how about those appliances? Serena put her hands in akimbo. You'll pay for them, of course, but it's only going to be a one-time fee, unlike electricity. Michael inwardly nodded. That was a very acceptable situation. Thankfully, it seemed that Princess Octavia mirrored his reaction. Very well. That's actually beneficial for me as well. The burden of payment won't just be borne by me. Each merman will be responsible for his own. Of course, Octavia was a politician at heart. Hearts? Despite caring a lot about her fellow mermen, she wouldn't pass up an opportunity where she can benefit from the expense of her fellow citizens. How much would it be? I think that it could cost. Somehow, in a matter about Reborn business, Michael was left out of the conversation by the two mermaid sisters. They discussed the pricing for these services without asking for his opinion, and only basing it on what the mermen could afford to pay. And it must be put into context that these beast folks were magnitudes richer than the average human, at least in terms of currency. After all, mermen dealt only in sand dollars. Because of that, the two princesses decided that each citizen would pay a one-time fee of 5 sand dollars to purchase all the necessary underwater appliances. It was an entire bundle consisting of lights, water heaters, washing machines, etc. Michael's eyes widened as he heard that. After all, these appliances were very cheap to produce, so cheap that the cost to produce them wasn't even in gold coins. It was in bronze coins. In comparison, a magnetic would easily pay hundreds of thousands, if not millions of gold coins for a single sand dollar. Put into that perspective, Michael's surprise was understandable. They'd be paying 5 sand dollars for, at most, 10 appliances. Sure, Michael would be changing the appliances to accommodate the depths of the water, but it was still disproportionate to the price. That sounds reasonable enough. Everyone can afford that. They might even think it's a little cheap, but I can just spin that as a generosity that I am willing to give them, said Octavia. That's cheap. Michael shouldn't be all that surprised now. He was a sand dollar millionaire after all. But he was still in the mindset of his pauper self, which was not even a month ago, by the way. Then, they also have to pay 6 sand dollars a month to access the electricity from the filters, Serena said nonchalantly. Octavia nodded. This time, though, she argued that she deserved a portion of that for herself, given that she did pay for the filters in the first place. She'd also be the one in charge of cleaning it up, keeping it in tip-top shape, and protecting them from the torrents of the chaotic waters. She asked for a reasonable 1 sand dollar cut, and left the rest to Michael. So according to Octavia's estimate, with the invertebrate mermen in the sunken ship numbering in the tens of thousands, Michael would be earning 100,000 sand dollars for the first month, and 50,000 after that. Somehow, this little filter business had already reached the same income of sand dollars as his roller coaster business. Princess Octavia then reached out her hands towards Michael. Ha ha ha! Don't worry, I'm not going to kiss you. This time, it's just a formal declaration of the cooperation between the Reborn company and the sunken ship. So, do you accept the terms? Michael thought about it for a second, before decisively accepting her proposition. Shaking her lithe tentacle hand, he couldn't help but think about the future. After all, if her campaign went well, then this meant that more and more mermen would migrate to the sunken ship to cast their votes in her direction. This meant more customers for the future electric city underwater. The best part was that this could all funnel back towards the nation of Reborn and the roller coasters. If they liked the taste of the future, they could decide to visit the paradise back in the parched lands and see its wonders for themselves. Meanwhile, Octavia was having the same ambitious thoughts. With the unique and miraculous inventions of the Reborn company, she finally had the chance to oust her brother as the de facto leader of the new Sparta Lake. And to look further beyond the future, she could extend her influence back in Atlantis, spreading the filters and electricity back there as well. All in all, this agreement between them benefited both parties, making way for a healthy relationship that can extend its longevity. After the agreement, Octavia and Serena, with the hatchet buried between them, worked together seamlessly to start the implementation of their plans. The two, who used to butt heads and tails, were now seamlessly working together to spread knowledge about electricity and the filters. This left Michael alone to work on building the giant filter itself. But before that, though, he reached into his pockets and took out his drone. It was finally upgraded. Finally, the drone wasn't surrounded by a cloud of nanoparticles, signaling its finished transformation. And even if ChatJK5 didn't inform him that it had finished its upgrade, it was easy to tell since he saw the different design of its frame. The one most obvious was its camera. Now that he upgraded it to have the capability of seeing through Magnetic's ability powers, it seemed to have increased its size by a sizable margin. Now, there was an upper dome full of glass on top of the frame, and the lower dome on its underside, making it a globe sandwich with a drone in the middle. Now, this would have almost doubled the size of the drone from its original size, which would be bad for its stealth, but thankfully its propellers seemed to have lessened as if to compensate for the increase. The propellers were hidden under a bulge in the corner of the drone's frame, with just a circular slit on its underside to let out the air for propulsion. This design would undoubtedly lower its noise, to the point where one couldn't hear it unless it was just a meter away from them. His drone's stealth capabilities experienced a qualitative leap because of this, especially if he added in the fact that he could reduce the frame size at will. And the best part was that this design didn't impact the drone's speed at all. In fact, it increased it by a significant margin as well. Having the propellers hidden inside the frame should have lessened the drone's flight speed, but it didn't. It was counterintuitive and could only be explained by the fact that his drone was filled with his own ability power, and therefore was broken free from the constraints of reality. Next, I want to see the upgraded inventory. That upgrade should be able to accommodate a lot more switches and batteries inside his drone. However, he couldn't see any obvious seams in the drone's metallic frame. It was flawless. But just as he thought that, nanoparticles suddenly emerged from the drone's surface, revealing a deep, dark vent by the frame's side. And immediately, a new window appeared in his vision, allowing him to see an itemized list of all the switches and batteries he had inside. Back then, it was limited to only a few, but now it was practically limitless. It was assuring to know that he could have an endless supply of Unity sabers whenever he wanted. After filling the drone's inventory with all of his stocked ability items inside, he went on to the next upgraded feature of the drone, its defense. He piloted the drone to fly off from his palm, break through the underwater bubble containing him, and go out into the open waters. As soon as the tidal wave of crushing water pressure and almost freezing temperatures assaulted the drone's frame, a prismatic layer appeared around its body, protecting it from the torrents. The protective shield surrounded the drone's surface tight around its surface, as if it went through the process of vacuum forming. This is different from my absolute Unity shield, he realized. This seemed better, and he noticed something within the very shield itself. There was a hint of an almost yellowish glow around it. It was subtle. He wouldn't have even noticed it if he weren't looking at it carefully. Faced with this mystery, he subconsciously used his drone to look at the weird shield with a lot more scrutiny. It wasn't a second later that he realized that he was trying to look at the drone, using the drone itself. Thankfully, he didn't embarrass himself. The drone's camera had a 360-degree view, allowing him to see the surface of its frame, and by extension, the shield that surrounded it. The drone's surface was now illuminating a reddish hue, something that only happened if something was emanating ability power. This shield has both Unity and ability power inside it. He couldn't help but feel jealous. Now, the drone had an even better defensive capability than he did. How did it do that? He tried combining ability power and Unity during his spare time, but even with the help of ChatJK5, he couldn't make a single bit of progress. It seemed like a Herculean task at the time. He knew that it was possible since he heard that the ancient humans were able to wield both powers. He thought he could achieve it too, given his propensity to be talented at that kind of stuff. But he wasn't able to do it. Yet, a simple upgrade for his drone achieved the impossible. And it only cost him one drop of SU. If he had known that the shield would contain both powers, then he would have bought it from the moment he saw it as an available upgrade. Then, he could have used that time to study it and try to replicate it for himself. I guess, sometimes being too powerful can be a downside. If he couldn't use his absolute unity defense to protect the drone, then he would have thought that this upgrade was a necessary purchase. Then, it wouldn't have been so close to destruction during his fight against the Unity creatures. Whatever, it's no use wallowing in regret. As a test, he used his Unity gun and shot it towards his drone. The shield briefly turned visible with a concentrated white glow at the point of contact. And in the next instant, the intensity of the white light dissipated as it got transferred around the shield's entire surface, fully absorbing the impact. Took the attack head-on. It didn't even wobble. Suppressing his envy, Michael just looked at the bright side. "At least I know I can use you as my shield if I need to," he said with a cold smile. The drone didn't move, but he could feel it shivering at his thoughts. He ignored it and focused on one of his most exciting upgrades. The mini-drones. Michael closed his eyes and commanded the mini-drones to take off. And as soon as he did, he felt a sharp pain in his mind. It was as if his very consciousness was splitting in a myriad of ways. The agony was so severe that he had to curl up inside the bubble like a child, clutching his head as multiple knives cut through his brain. And unbeknownst to him, his drone remained dry, floating in the dark depths of the sea. Then, in an explosive burst, multiple streams of nanoparticles exited out of its frame, each microscopic particle protected by that strange dual-powered shield. They formed a geometric pattern around the drone, with it acting as the nexus and the nodes starting to form from the stream of nanoparticles. In a flash, the vague visage of a rectangular box began to form from the stream of nanoparticles. If Michael could concentrate, then he would have seen the formation of the new mini-drones. Unfortunately, he was still preoccupied from the hellish and infernal pain that was brought from the birth of these drones. Ever since he upgraded his drone vision, he'd always had two perspectives in his mind, one from his own body and one from his drone. He had two of everything: sensation, touch, hearing, vision, and during the first time, double the pain as well. But now, with 16 mini-drones simultaneously powering up for the first time and connecting to his mind, he felt, however much, tuples of pain in his mind. The term is sextuple. Arga. He started to regret being so excited at releasing all mini-drones at once. And to think that he wanted to purchase 100 mini-drones. He couldn't even imagine the torment he would feel once they were made. Suddenly, his vision started to blur. All he could see was a dark blue hue, with a couple of dark spots placed in different spots. Then with a flash, his vision changed again. It still had the same hazy dark blue hue as the background, but the positions of the dots were different now. This happened multiple times in a few seconds before he finally realized that it came from his mini-drones. It was transmitting their cameras to him. His brain still couldn't process that many simultaneous streams of data, so some of them overpowered his own vision and took over his consciousness. He felt dizzy, nauseated, seasick, everything. It took everything for him not to vomit, since he knew that it would just be contained inside the bubble. "URGHHH," he groaned. The pain from his head, splitting 16 different ways, finally subsided, with only nausea remaining. Unfortunately, that symptom didn't look like it was going to dissipate anytime soon. You need to get used to the mini-drones if you want the sickness to stop. I know. Easier said than done. All of his mini-drones had the same camera feature as his main drone, a 360-degree view. This made the vision even more disorienting, especially since all of them overlapped each other in a convoluted mess. Things became so confusing that when he commanded one of the mini-drones to fly, he ended up causing his body to raise its hand instead. Feeling himself panicking, he forced himself to breathe and calm down. He thought back to when he first got his drone and how he got used to its overstimulating stream of sensory information. Then he remembered compartmentalization. His mind wasn't split another 16 different ways for nothing. All he had to do was assign each drone to each compartment in his mind, making sure that there was no overlap in between. On the verge of discharging today's lunch, he randomly took control of one drone and assessed its position. He battled with the haziness and blurriness of the camera But thankfully, the reddish glow of the main drone became his compass. Once he figured its position relative to the main drone at the top, he was able to memorize the sensation and put it into one of the compartments in his mind. He temporarily named it as MD number 1. He repeated this procedure, heaving and retching during the process. Thankfully, by his 6th compartmentalized drone, the burden of sensory overload became lessened and he was able to finally see the world through crystal clear clarity. His job became progressively easier by then, until he finally compartmentalized all 16 drones into its own section in his mind. He heaved a sigh of relief, feeling in control of his body once he finally relaxed. I did it, but although he prevented his mind from a permanent debuff, this came at the cost of experiencing all of his mini-drones at the same time. He'd have to actively look at the compartment in his mind to see what it was seeing, which was very inconvenient. It wasn't like his drone, which he could see simultaneously with his own vision. I'll have to work on that. For now, he was just glad that he came out of that with only an acrid taste in his mouth from all the near vomiting. You do not have to control them all individually. What? The Drone Hive upgrade comes with an easy system for you to control the mini-drones. You just simply have to transmit your commands to your main drone, and it would automatically control all mini-drones to enact your task. In hindsight, it made sense. There was no limit to how much mini-drones he could buy, which meant that it was intended to have a limitless amount of them. Michael already felt his limit at 16 mini-drones, and having more would simply risk breaking his mind into pieces. But with the Drone Hive upgrade, he didn't have to control them all individually. He wasn't meant to. Doing so would be too much for one person to bear. So all I have to do is command my main drone? He closed his eyes and concentrated. Suddenly, all mini-drones moved through the water simultaneously. These mini-drones, small enough to be held in one hand but not enough to be grasped completely, all floated simultaneously through the waters with absolute precision and coordination. All 16 of them assumed their positions, forming a triangular barrier in front of him. It works. With a couple more easy instructions, the mini-drones began to move in different templates and timings. For example, he had one half create a cubed formation, while the other a simple line. He commanded them to move in different paces, and they followed through it perfectly. At first, he thought that complex and convoluted patterns would severely limit his use of the mini-drones, but thankfully, they followed through with exactly what he had in his mind. As long as he had an exact image, formation, or instruction he had in his mind, then his mini-drones would make his vision come true with ease. However, if he commanded it with vague and abstract instructions like, "Move as if you're welcoming peace and serenity," then the drones wouldn't do anything at all. Another thing he was pleasantly surprised to find out was the delay, or the lack of it. He thought that first relaying his instructions to the main drone would create a severe delay in the instructions being followed. But surprisingly, the latency between them was almost non-existent. It was even faster than any signals like Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, Ethernet, and other things. Somehow, they were connected through an invisible and ever-present link that made it seem like the mini-drones were simply an extension of the main drone's body. The mini-drones are moving quite slow, though. He distinctly remembered his first mini-drones to be much faster than this. It didn't lag behind his main drone in speed all that much. But now, they were moving with quite a sluggish demeanor. Then he remembered. It was underwater. These mini-drones weren't being protected by the dual shield like his main drone was, meaning that it was currently trudging through the icy cold waters of the lake, with the resistance severely hampering its speed. Why am I even practicing it here in the lake? He shook his head and teleported himself back to the nation of Reborn. Once the shadow subsided back into his feet, he found himself in the middle of the desert, with his drone and its 16 baby clones with it. Water and mist splashed from the mini-drone's propellers as it began to purge all of the water from its propulsion systems. Now, the familiar buzzing of its fans rang into his ears. With water no longer dragging it back, the mini-drones were able to show off its real speed, performing its duties at a much faster rate than before. Now that's much better. And now that he was back in the endless sands of the parched lands, it was the perfect chance to test out the limits of the drone's distance. He commanded 3 mini-drones to fly as far away as they could. Once they were out of his sight, he commanded his mini-drones to line up in the shape of a giant R. In his mind, he included the 3 missing drones in this instruction. A second later, the drones formed the letter, with only the bottom missing from the symbol. He then closed his eyes and focused on the 3 mini-drones in his compartmentalized mind. Immediately, 3 new perspectives arrived in his vision, disorienting him for a bit. Thankfully, his previous agonizing experience allowed him to be more tolerant of such a nauseating effect. They're going back, he realized. He saw his own tiny, miniature visage from the drone's camera, slowly becoming bigger as they came back like prodigal children. So there's no limit to commanding these drones. Just like with the phone and the internet cube. He became pensive, coming into terms with the possibility that perhaps there was a connection between that mysterious cube and his drone. That cube can also use both unity and ability powers. His gaze moved over to the main drone hovering beside his shoulder, his eyes showing a mixture of awe, surprise, and a little bit of apprehension. He may have been underestimating this little mithril artifact of his. It was only when he finally obtained enough Su drops could he finally see the true powers of the drone. It would only become more evident once he tested this new feature. He looked back at all 16 mini-drones, which had formed into the letter R. In his mind, he pulled the trigger. Immediately, all mini-drones emitted a mechanical release. Tick, 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 as a slit appeared in their bottom frame, slowly opening as the gun's barrel finally unfolded in its place. Its metallic tip started to unleash a bright prismatic light, as the power of unity began to gather into the drone. And a second later, they fired, discharging a beam of a purely destructive pillar of unity into the parched lands. Clouds of sands exploded from the point of impact, creating a temporary storm. Once the sands began to cascade out of the air, Michael slowly approached to see the aftermath in his own eyes. Looking down, he saw a black outline of the letter R charred into the sands of the parched lands. It was made up of a connection of circular shockwaves, imitating the same formation as the mini-drones. Anyone high up in the air would be able to see such an enormous vandalism in the desolate desert. He moved closer. At the very point of contact, he saw a small but extremely deep hole at the epicenter. The unity beam incinerated anything in its path. Around this hole was a shockwave of incinerated sand, with those closest to the center turning into black glass. Wow, that was the only word in his mind right now. The intensity and power of the unity gun wasn't lessened even a single bit, despite it being fired from a mini-drone. In fact, it seemed stronger even. The stronger. Is it because I've also become stronger? He had come a long way from before. Just a few months ago, he was barely at the 4th stage of body formation. Now he was at the 7th. And during that time, it wasn't just his ability powers that increased, but also his control of unity. Interestingly, the power of his unity didn't come from the progress of his mana cores. Instead, it came from his Godforge pieces. The stronger his Diva's cultivation was, the stronger his unity became. The two really are connected to each other. This meant that strengthening his own cultivation also strengthened his drones, multiplied sextuple times or how much mini-drones he had. He instructed his mini-drones to target away from each other to test their individual strengths. But what if he told them to aim at a single point? Michael imagined an army of mini-drones in the air, their barrels turning incandescent from unity, before surgically shooting a beam that all intersected into a single point. It would be the same as sunlight. By itself, the heat of the sun was warm and tolerable. But once it was focused using a magnifying glass, then it was enough to melt through metal itself. Michael could only imagine how much damage his mini-drones could inflict. And that's just with 16 drones. ChatJK5, how much money do I have now? You have 2,311,523 sand dollars. If he converted all of that to Su drops, then he would have 231 drops in total, which would equal to a whopping 231 mini-drones at his disposal. Once he summoned them, they would practically be an indistinguishable cloud of metal in the air. Together, They would be a real gigantic, amorphous monster that shot a destructive beam of unity from all sides. Ha 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 ha. The prospect of having an army of mini-drones by his side made him laugh like a maniacal evil villain from a fantasy movie. Thankfully, no one was here to see him in the desolate, endless desert. Record starting. Did you say something, ChatJK5? It was nothing. Just adding something cute to my collection. Michael was sure his personal AI assistant said something, but his excitement for his mini-drones made everything else look irrelevant. He couldn't wait to go back to the Merman Lake and exchange all of his money to buy as many mini-drones as he could. But he was so excited that he completely forgot about the harrowing and almost traumatic experience of splitting his mind 16 different ways. Just as his shadow was about to envelop his entire body, he suddenly felt a vibration in his pockets. It was from his phone. Someone just texted him. Lupin. Hello? H3 low? H4H4H4. S0RRY. It's my first Tim 3T3 Sting Psalm 30NE. Smiley face. These emojis AR3 cool, wink with tongue sticking out. The brown blood chief sure did know how to do an amazing impersonation of an annoying texter for a first-timer. Do you need something? Michael replied to the text. Thankfully, his annoyance at being interrupted didn't translate well into a message. ChatJK5, please translate his text to something legible. Yep, brown bloods are now untouchable in baseball. Just so you know, nobody can hit my pitches. Once we have a rematch, your guys won't score anymore. The Chief's message went on longer than that, going into tangents about baseball and other stuff. I should have made a limit on messages. Thankfully, ChatJK5 can easily summarize everything into a concise text. Chief Lupin reports that baseball practice is going well. Omisu has also integrated well into the tribe, learning to control herself much better. Right? Omisu and Jaku. The chief's texts made him remember that he still owed the two Dragonborns their own mini-drones. As much as he was extremely reluctant to part with two drones, they would benefit much more from them than he would. I'll give it to them later. Is there anything more from the chief? Yes, he also wishes to discuss something with you once you have free time. He talks about a certain dwarf in New Sparta. A dwarf. Only one man came to mind. That was none other than their king himself, Byru. The man left his kingdom to visit New Sparta, telling them nothing about where he would go and what his motive was. I guess I'll have to visit the Brownbloods after this. Finding that alcoholic king was the only way he was going to start mass production of mithril for his phones. And he was now more desperate than before, seeing as each $1 earned from that business contributed directly to his growing armada of mini-drones. First, though, he had one last thing to check in his drone, which was perhaps his most expensive of purchases. Holding his main drone in his hand, he touched the miniature door on its frame, teleporting him directly inside its pocket dimension. Finding himself in his control room, he noticed that the whole thing had become a lot bigger than before. The most noticeable change was the wall on the right inundated with screens. Usually, these screens simply displayed the outside view of the drone, all 360 degrees of its perspective. But now, the screens on this wall showed something different. It showed the mini-drone's perspectives, as well as a touchscreen button layout for its controls. And a meter away from this wall was a desk, showing complex buttons, switches, and controls that seemed to directly relate to all mini-drones in his purview. Why are there even controls here? He could simply control them with his mind. After some thought, he only had one conclusion. Is it designed so that other people control them? Once he took a grander look at the entire control room, it made sense. It seemed that this entire space was made to have multiple people all working together to control all the drone systems, both the main and the minis. For now, it didn't seem all that useful. So, he put his focus back on track. He looked behind him, seeing the door leading to the isolated room. Now, he has 8 of them. Strangely, though, there was still only one door recessed on the wall. The only thing different was the monitor on the desk in front of the isolated room. On the top left of the screen, it showed his original room, with a budding darkwood vine starting to permeate through the elven soil on the ground. On a small, semi-transparent window overlaid on top of it were the room's current parameters. It was all green, showing a perfect environment for Darkwood to flourish. And on the other 7 screens, it simply showed a desolate space filled with nothing but whiteness. These were perfectly sufficient breeding grounds for his Darkwood business. Excited, he walked towards the door. As soon as he got close, nanoparticles emerged out of nowhere at the side of the door. An instant later, 8 buttons formed in rows and columns, resembling an elevator's controls. Ah, so that's how I go to the other rooms. Pushing the button for the first floor, the tactile knob lit up with a yellowish glow. Then a second later, the isolated room's door creaked as it automatically opened in front of him, immediately sucking him into the space. He found himself back to his first Darkwood farm. It had been a good few days after he first planted it, and it had already grown a substantial amount, with the vines already breaking through the plowed soil. Is it just me? Or is this thing growing faster than normal? He already noticed it before, but this Darkwood didn't follow the rate of growth written in the Darkwood experiments. It was much faster by a small but very noticeable margin. Suddenly, a thought popped up into his head. There was something about what Serena said a few days earlier. Legends say that Mariana's jewel will bring growth and prosperity to the ocean, but conversely it could also cause ruin to the entire world. Bring growth and prosperity. Could it be? He looked at the Darkwood sapling. There was just a single stalk bursting out of the elven soil, letting him see a glimpse of the vine-like roots below. No, Darkwood is the essence of Earth-like. It doesn't have any correlation to the sea or the oceans at all. He knew all the parameters inside the isolated room. The very reason why this space is special was because he could precisely control every variable inside it, making sure that there was no disturbance or connection to the outside world at all. It's what made farming Darkwood possible in the first place. So, this unexpected faster rate of growth was truly perplexing. Nothing should have caused such a change, at least not something he installed. Faced with no other explanation, he couldn't help but think that the giant pearl-like object in his possession was somehow the cause of all this. Since it came from an ancient Leviathan creature, it was safe to assume that the object wasn't normal and probably as powerful or as mystified as Cthulhu itself. Perhaps, it was powerful enough to somehow break through the confines of the pocket dimension and influence the growth of these Darkwood. Now, this should have been cause for celebrations, given that its effects could bring him more sand dollars in the long run. However, this would force him to recognize that the unassuming and seemingly normal Pearl Cthulhu gave him truly was the Mariana's jewel that everyone in the 7 seas were looking for. It was even more harrowing to think that he had an apocalyptic object just sitting in a little cabin in his pocket dimension. No, there's no way that's Mariana's jewel, he said to himself. The egocentric part of himself wanted to put the mysterious pearl inside the isolated room, to see if it could intensify the Darkwood's growth even more than before. But he wasn't that sure of his guess. Who knew, maybe using the mysterious pearl in such a way would inadvertently activate the apocalypse. He didn't want that. The whole business model of his Darkwood farm was based on longevity. Farming more Darkwood gave him more money, which he could use to buy more isolated rooms. Rinse and repeat. He'd be shooting himself in the foot if he started the apocalypse now. So it wasn't worth it to try. Let's go slow and steady. And with that thought, he quickly left the isolated room and started to work on planting 7 more Darkwood seeds. First, he teleported himself back to the insanely distant Elven Kingdom, lowering the mana density of the entire parched lands as he did so. Afraid that he'd be ambushed by Zephyrs, he quickly dug up cubes of soil from the ground, enough to fill 7 more isolated spaces. Once he got what he needed, he immediately teleported back to the nation of Reborn's smith shop. There, he obtained all the materials he needed to create all the systems. Sprinklers, fans, heaters, etc. After that, he took a brief visit back to Metropolis to buy morel spores to be used as fertilizers. The old man offered him some shrooms again, but he denied it, of course. Once he had everything he needed, he went back to the isolated rooms and spent the whole day setting up all the farms. Finally, after some good old-fashioned hard work, all 8 Darkwood farms were up and running. Oh right, I should refill the water tanks. He manually gathered water from a nearby pond in a forest and went back to the isolated rooms. But before he even entered the space, he caught something in the corner of his eyes. He looked at the monitor, his eyes widening. On the CCTV cameras, all 8 rooms now had a little darkwood sapling bursting a few inches out of the soil. "What the hell?" he cursed out loud. He only planted those seeds for barely a few minutes. Yet now, they were in the same stage of growth as his first darkwood sapling who had days to grow. It's because of Mariana's jewel, no, the mysterious pearl. It's not the Mariana's jewel. He corrected his thoughts, but even his own subconscious was starting to have doubts. He didn't know what kind of hijinks was happening with his darkwood farms, but he was not comfortable with it at all. Now he was sure that it wasn't because he added too much water or fertilizer to the seed to make it grow that fast. It's because of something else, something supernatural, maybe even apocalyptic. He quickly left the control room and entered into the main pocket dimension, finding himself in a lustrous green forest with a mountain as its backdrop. He flew towards the wooden cabin, his speed becoming more careful and wary as he got closer. He opened the wooden door, its creaks giving him the heebie-jeebies. The 2 boxes remained as he left it. On the right was the internet cube, still mysterious and ever powerful as it was before, but not as dangerous as he first thought it was. On the left was the unassuming iridescent spherical pearl, whose size was just a little bit smaller than a bowling ball. Given how ChatJK5 almost perished from it, he thought that he'd have the most trouble with the internet cube, while the pearl was as harmless as any other tabletop decoration. But now, the situation has completely reversed. Approaching the apocalyptic object closer, all of his defenses were up and running. Thankfully, the foreboding object didn't change a single speck. It remained as beautiful and ethereal from the moment he received it. In hindsight, the fact that it came from a Leviathan monster should have alerted him of its possible dangerous effects. What should I do with this? He wanted to put it far away from the Darkwood farm, afraid that there was a special connection between the two. There must be something that linked them. After all, the forest around the cabin remained unchanged. If it experienced the same growth as the Darkwood, then this whole place should have been overrun with greenery, moss, and vines. And its close proximity to the pearl should have strengthened its effects even more. So, he could only conclude that only Darkwood was affected by the hastened growth. His first thought was to take the pearl as far away from the farm as possible. But where? Taking it out into the real world was a no-go. That could really trigger the apocalypse. Should I just move the cabin farther away? That seemed pointless. If the pearl's effects could breach through the different dimensions separating this and the isolated room, then no amount of distance could block it. All in all, it seemed as if there wasn't anything he could do. ChatJK5. Any solutions? Do you need to move it? Of course. What if it could trigger the end of the world? What if it didn't? The nature of Mariana's jewel has not been properly determined. Only one person said it was dangerous. Serena told him that Mariana's jewel triggered the apocalypse. However, when Octavia and Professor Lichtenstein talked about the object, they never mentioned it had dangerous side effects. And the professor's words held more weight, given his extensive knowledge about history. He wasn't saying that Serena was lying, only that her interpretation of it was inaccurate. Perhaps its apocalyptic nature was merely a horrific myth told to children, so that they wouldn't risk their lives searching for something that maybe didn't even exist in the first place. Am I just overthinking things? I have not sensed any negative side effects from the pearl or the Darkwood. After ruminating on it for a little bit, perhaps he really was just being paranoid. He breathed a sigh. It's as if a huge weight was released from his shoulders. So there's no need to move the pearl. Just like the famous saying, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." He stood there for a few seconds, before he relented and pushed the 2 boxes a few meters away from each other. Just in case. Michael exited the drone's pocket dimension, burying all those grim and somber thoughts far away into the recesses of his mind. Thankfully, he had many different compartments in his mind now. Immediately, he felt jolly and refreshed, as if he had just taken a warm bath in a hot spring. I need to buy more Sue drops, he thought to himself. Why? To buy mini drones, of course. Having hundreds of mini drones at his side would make him extremely happy. That was the only reason. It definitely wasn't because he was worried about an apocalypse and wanted to arm himself to the teeth. No, definitely not. Teleporting himself to New Sparta, he found himself arriving at the outskirts of the Merman Lake, near the bulwark separating the boundary and the quadrant itself. He would have teleported himself to the lake itself, but his shadow informed that it wasn't safe to do so. There were other people there. He wrapped himself in his own shadow, lowering his presence to the point where no one would notice him if they weren't directly looking at him. Then he glided forwards, zipping through the shadows of trees until he saw the wooden pier in the distance. There, he saw a group of people talking with mermen submerged in the water. Correction. They were confronting, not talking. Lots of aggressive pointing were thrown around at the mermen, as if they were berating them for something. "It's your time to shine," he said as he unleashed his drone. In an instant, it turned invisible and flew towards the confrontation. Once it got close enough, he finally understood why they were arguing with each other. "What do you mean you're backing out? That's not what we agreed upon." The one shouting was a young man in his 20s, long green hair almost up to his shoulders, and wearing a scowl on his face. "Princess Octavia owes you nothing. There was no contract between us," replied a squid merman quietly. But no matter how much he tried to hide it, his pale red skin gave away his anger. "Does she not value honor? We had a verbal agreement. Be honest, she chose someone else, right? I've been hearing what you mermen are saying." "Who are they?" The mermen pursed their lips. They were just about to express their anger in a not-so-respectful way, when their gaze moved away from them and towards the golden-haired youth approaching. Michael didn't know why he approached them out of the blue. At first, he was just planning to observe from the shadows and let things progress without his intervention. But somehow, hearing those rage-baiting words from the green-haired man made him want to go over there and introduce himself. "What am I thinking? Surely this wouldn't end peacefully." As if proving his thoughts, the group of humans turned to look at him, hearing his seemingly haughty approach. "Huh? Who are you? Begone if you don't want to see the wrath of my fists." "I'm not in a good mood." Michael shot back a question. "Who are you?" The ill-tempered man scoffed, before introducing himself with self-indulgent pride. "I am named Frick of the famous Faux-Still Company." Silence echoed in the lake instead of the applause Frick seemed to be waiting for. "I've never heard of you," Michael said, and kept on walking towards the mermen, who were currently conflicted with his approach. They were told by their two princesses to keep their mouths shut about Sir Keo and their cooperation at all costs. They didn't want the Faux-Still Company making trouble with the Reborn Company after knowing that they were the one who replaced them. In truth, Princess Octavia already sent a letter to Frick, the founder of the Faux-Still Company, informing them of the change in plans. Octavia even sent a generous mound of sand dollars towards them as a sign of her apology. But unexpectedly, Frick immediately went running over to the lake demanding to overturn her decision. He wasn't just indignant, he was furious, which was quite unexpected as he displayed himself as a gallant figure when they first met. But now, it seemed as if she committed a crime equivalent to spitting on the graves of his whole family lineage. Of course, Octavia was no pushover and remained adamant in her decision. She waved them out of the lake. Literally. She sent a giant tidal wave that sent their bubbles up to the surface and prevented them from entering the lake now and in the future. And after seeing that unseemly attitude, Octavia rightfully instructed all of her adjutants to never mention Keo or the Reborn Company at all, afraid that Frick and the Faux-Still Company would redirect all of their anger onto them. But now it was Keo himself who was approaching them. "Ha ha ha!" Frick laughed coldly, slightly amused and pissed off at Michael's cavalier attitude. "Wow, you really said that. We'll see. We'll see, ha ha ha." Seeing the growing tension between the two, the mermen immediately interrupted. "I'm sorry, human, but the lake is currently unavailable to visit." One of the mermens tried to signal Michael with his eyes. Michael didn't seem to understand it. "I'm ready to install the filters." "I'm sorry?" the merman asked, his eyes widening. "The filters. You paid me for it." As if a switch had finally clicked, Frick and the rest of his cohorts raised their eyebrows. "It's him? You replaced us?" The mermen immediately surfaced out of the water, moving in between them to try and smoothen out the situation. And if things go from bad to worse, then they had all the permission to protect Kyo at all costs, even if it meant spilling blood. Of course, they didn't want it to escalate at that point. No one did. "No, no," Michael said, shaking his head. "I didn't replace you. I'm the upgrade." All the colors on the merman's ever-changing skin paled once they heard that. What was Sir Kyo doing? It's as if he was asking for a fight. Meanwhile, Frick was on the verge of exploding. The vein on his forehead was bulging, nails digging on his palms. But in the end, he took a big breath and gave Michael a shallow smile. "Is that so? Well, congratulations." And with a shrug, Frick led his cohorts away from the lake, stomping on the wooden docks as they did so. With a final insidious glance at Michael, they disappeared into trees without a new peep. Surprisingly, things ended up pretty peacefully for such a direct confrontation. The mermen were sure that a few hands would be thrown today. They heaved a sigh of relief. "We apologize for that, Sir Kyo. Trust that we will deal with this at the soonest instance possible. Princess Octavia will not tolerate this kind of behavior. We shall speak with the proper authorities and warn them of this behavior. For now, it would be best if you take shelter into the lake so that we can protect you. It may be possible that they will seek out a physical fight without issuing a formal duel." Frick could have thrown a handkerchief at Michael's feet, challenging him to a sanctum duel if he was really that aggrieved about being replaced. But he didn't. One would think that Frick wanted to back down and bury the hatchet, but that was extremely unlikely, especially after glaring daggers at Michael before he left. It was very well possible that he would seek justice through scrupulous and less than formal ways. So, it would be safest for Michael to stay in the lake for the meantime before things were solved. "Please step inside," said the merman, who had already created the water bubble. But Michael shook his head. "I just have something else to do," he said, glancing back. There was nothing in the field of trees surrounding the lake. But with his drone vision, he saw multiple blobs of orange light hiding up on tall branches, hidden away from the leafy foliage. There were about 20 of them, all using ability powers to escape from the merman's eyes, and also to hide the bloodlust aimed at him. There were just 6 of them here, including Frick. This meant that 14 of them had been hiding there from the start. It was clear from this secrecy alone that they were aiming for something nefarious even before he got there and agitated them. In fact, he was willing to bet that they were specifically waiting for him, or at least the person who caused them to be spurned by the octopus princess, and ambushed them from the get-go. It may be possible that these 14 ninjas hiding in the trees were escorts, intended to protect the gallant Frick and his cohorts. But that was very unlikely. They would have made themselves known in order to deter any kind of trouble coming their way. No, they were here for other purposes. They were here to enact their own form of justice and teach anybody who crossed them a lesson they would never forget. But they're not here to pressure the mermen. They're here to pressure me into backing out. That was the only conclusion he could come up with. And they were going to do that through underhanded methods. Wow, are companies really that desperate to earn sand dollars? According to Princess Octavia, the Fostil company was set to gain 10 million sand dollars from their project with the mermen, before Michael stole it away from them. Understandably, anyone would feel a pang of regret in their heart once that much money got away from their hands. But if they planned on taking it back through immoral ways, then they'd be risking their whole future in New Sparta once people found out what they were planning. They'd be losing a lot more than 10 million if that was the case. I guess that's why they're hiding themselves. They would be gaining everything back if they were able to persuade Michael in backing out. If was the critical word there. And it looked like they brought some heavy-duty fighters to make that happen. He commanded his invisible to come closer to the hidden ambushers, its flight barely emitting a buzz as it caught sight of its target just meters away from it. They all wore a nondescript black outfit that obscured their whole body and most of their faces, with only a slit for their eyes to see through. He changed fast. He focused on one specific person among the ambushers. His physical disguise was perfectly matching with the other ninjas around him, but he could never hide that disdain in his eyes directed back at Michael. It was Frick, indistinguishable from his first appearance wearing the proud violet armor set from the Fostil Company. He's at the 4th stage of body formation. Looking around, Michael noticed that he was actually the strongest magnetic amongst his crew of cohorts. The rest of them were around the 1st to 3rd stage, with most just barely emitting ability powers in their chests. This company is stacked. They're sending their whole magnetic line up. He thought that they'd just be sending a few magnetics coupled by mortal soldiers/adventurers for this mission, but they were actually sending all magnetics for this. Who is this Fostil Company? How do they have so many magnetics? Most companies only had a maximum of 10 magnetics under their employ. Even the 3 legacies only had more or less 15 in their companies. After all, the resources to create a magnetic wasn't cheap, even for those who had come from a conglomerate background. Yet, this unassuming and unknown company actually had 20 magnetics in total. Sure, most of them were in the 1st stage, but the fact of the matter was that they were still magnetics. They could defeat a platoon of magicians all on their own. Now it makes sense why they don't want a sanctum duel. They're going for quantity instead of quality. Even a 5th stage magnetic could be defeated by 5 1st stage magnetics. What should I do? Their target was clear. He would have noticed his bloodlust even if he wasn't using his drone. Of course, going against such a large group of magnetics would be suicide, at least for most people. So, it was only natural for him to ask for support or to avoid them entirely. But for some reason, he didn't want to do that. There was a fire burning in his heart, a fire that could not be quelled through rest or inaction. Sir Kyo? What's wrong? Do you see something? The merman noticed his silence and took his contemplative silence and gaze as a clue to what was really happening. They turned serious and wary. They started to move in front of him, using their bodies to shield him. But Michael stopped them. No, it's nothing, waving off their concerns. You guys should return to the sunken ship. They looked at him with concern. But what about you, Sir Kyo? I'm fine. I just remembered that I need to do something else. We'll accompany you. He raised his hand. I'm fine, he insisted. The mermen turned silent. They had no choice but to follow his words. They couldn't force him to accept their protection. So, with lingering looks, the mermen soon submerged themselves underwater and shot off to the sunken ship. They were going to report this to Princess Octavia and ask for her opinion. With Michael all alone, he took a deep breath and started to walk back towards the boundary. He retraced his own steps, finding himself back to the boundary between the different quadrants. He didn't stop there. He continued to walk out of New Sparta's walls, and didn't stop walking for almost hours on end. Behind him, figures dashed through shadows. Michael continued to walk out of New Sparta, out of anyone's prying eyes for miles and miles on end. He was essentially giving his ambushers exactly what they wanted. They now had him all alone, with no one there to help him. Once he was sure no one was around, he stopped, finding himself in the middle of a forest clearing, with the abundant trees muffling any sounds that came out. Once he stopped, he felt a cool breeze wash over his body as figures dashed around him, all 20 ambushers surrounding him from all sides. You, a haughty voice said from among the black-robed ambushers, void your contract with the mermen, and you may get to live for another day. And what if I don't? Michael asked, his voice calm and not one bit surprised at their appearance. The ambushers should have taken that as a foreboding sign. But they didn't. Ha ha ha. Well, you'll die. And those were his last words before multiple beams of unity shot from behind, burning a hole on all their chests. All 20 ambushers died on the spot.